When you enter into a negotiation, no one tells you this will be a predominantly distributive negotiation, or this will be a predominantly creative negotiation. So how do you know which method to apply? Will that conversation with your family, your supplier, or someone else require skillful competitive negotiating? Or will it require skilled interest-based negotiating? Which approach should you plan to use? In this session, we'll bring the two approaches together. That's because most arm's-length negotiations, and even some others, have both competitive and creative dimensions. Fortunately, it's possible to handle both aspects effectively, enabling you to both do something I call winning warmly, so that both parties are content and you are very content. As we'll also see in other negotiations, it's best not to worry about the distributive side at all. In our first session, we began to consider the power of interest-based negotiating, and we've seen since developed that idea in several ways. In later sessions, we explored distributive negotiating and saw how negotiators could claim different portions of the pie. But each of these approaches in isolation can be somewhat dangerous. A naive negotiator who focuses solely on the distributive side can wind up producing a weak deal for both sides that misses big chances to create wealth. But a naively creative negotiator who focuses solely on the creative side can get into trouble too. He can wind up creating a big pie and winding up with crumbs. Imagine you're negotiating to purchase a business for your company. There are several issues to work out, and your boss has told you to fight hard so that the company does well. So you negotiate one issue at a time with your counterparty, making strong requests each time and conceding slowly, typically meeting in the middle on each issue. With railroad-like efficiency, you work down the list of agenda items until you finally complete the talks, shake hands with the seller, and return to your headquarter offices. There, you report with a smile, well, I gave, I got, we didn't get everything we might have wanted, but I bargained hard, feel good about the results. An audit later shows that the value of the deal to you and your company is $2.4 million, and you feel great. Interestingly, the audit also shows the deal is worth $2.4 million to the seller. But now imagine that a peer of yours has an almost identical negotiation at the same time with another seller for a similar company. She took a different approach. And as a result, an audit reveals that the two sides together created $12 million in value through their negotiation. Now you don't feel so good. Turns out that you claimed half of a very small pie, but in the other talks, the negotiators created a humongous pie. Now you feel terrible. But a closer look at your peer's deal reveals another surprise. Of the $12 million in value, she brought back only $1 million. The other side gained 11. Your peer remains confident. The main thing is that we created so much wealth together, she says. But what will your boss say as she reviews her deal and yours? Chances are your boss will be unhappy with both of you. She wanted you to do well for the company. Creating little wealth was costly. Claiming little wealth was costly too. There must be some way, says your boss, to do better, to create and claim a good portion of a big pie. And she'll be right. There is. As we've seen before, research finds that skilled negotiators can create 11% more wealth for their side than mediocre negotiators do, and 6% more wealth for their counterparts than mediocre negotiators do. Did you get that? When they need it, skilled negotiators create and claim better. They find a way for both sides to do well, and for their side to do very well. Let's quickly add, as we've said throughout, that there are many situations where it's best not to worry about the distributive side so much, and to strive for a fair and even generous outcome. As useful as it can be to think about being creative and dividing up wealth, that's a two-dimensional approach that ignores the critical third dimension of relationship. So I don't recommend that you think solely about expanding and cutting the pie. There's an old joke about a teenage son who asks his father for $100. The father says, $50? What do you need $25 for? I don't recommend that you do that with your family members, or anyone else for that matter. In fact, even in arm's-length transactions, we want to be thoughtful about our approach so we don't damage the relationship. That said, let's see how we can balance creating and claiming in arm's-length transactions. Researchers have found that the key is something we've been moving toward throughout the course: systematic preparation. That means being ready for both the creative side and the competitive side. As we will see, it also means being ready to talk about these things in respectful, honest, rapport-building ways. One of the first surprises is the discovery that it can actually be unwise to negotiate one issue at a time. In our imaginary story in which you bought a new business, we imagine that you and the other negotiator worked with railroad-like efficiency as you struggled over one agenda item at a time, concluding it, and then moving on to the next topic, and then the next. That's the way most negotiators and most meetings operate. It's also dangerous. That's because it fosters a naively competitive approach that conceals the potential for making creative trades between topics. In our example, imagine that you're very concerned that the seller doesn't compete with you after you buy her company. She doesn't care so much about that one way or the other, but she's badly in need of cash and wants you to pay for the business up front without any financing. Let's imagine you have plenty of cash, so you don't care very much about how and when you pay. But now imagine that you first struggle over the issue of non-competition, with you demanding a 10-year non-compete clause and the seller insisting on a 2-year non-compete clause. And you finally agree to a compromise of 6 years. Then you turn to the question of financing, and again you struggle. You demand that you pay no money up front and instead pay the money in installments over several years. She demands full payment up front. Finally, you compromise at 50%. No wonder you both got so little satisfaction or value from the deal. You would have both preferred it if you'd agreed to a 10-year non-compete agreement, which is your top priority, not hers, and full cash payment up front, which is her top priority, not yours. That is, if you traded the cheap for the dear, you'd given more on the issue you care less about for more of the issue that you care more about. You would have been much happier, and so would she. But how could you discover that much more satisfying deal? You were discussing one issue at a time, and there was no chance to trade one topic for the other. When negotiators discuss one issue at a time, we call that linear bargaining. It's dangerous, even though it's very common and seems to be efficient. It's dangerous precisely because it kills the chance for creative trades between topics. For this reason, skilled negotiators prepare in different ways to discuss more than one issue at a time. That is, to practice non-linear bargaining. One way to do that is to plan to say something like this early in the negotiation. I think we may find it helps us both if we agree that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, so that we can explore creative trades. Of course, you can tentatively reach agreements on single issues if you wish, on a single issue if you wish, but by suggesting that ground rule early on, it allows you to go back and make changes, that is, trades, if you later discover it would be mutually beneficial to do it. If you suggested that rule, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, in your talks to buy the company, you and the seller might have together discovered a valuable trade. Similarly, a skilled negotiator may refuse to simply concede unilaterally on a single issue and instead suggest a trade. Respectfully, no, I can't just give more on the issue of non-competition, but I'd be willing to consider it if we might be able to do better on the issue of financing. A simple way to remember this point is to remember the phrase, no, but. No, I can't just concede, but I can consider a trade. It's a particularly useful phrase to have in mind when you encounter a negotiator who uses a classic sharp bargaining tactic called yes, but. There, just as it looks like you have an agreement, the other negotiator nibbles you, asking for still more, saying, yes, we have a deal, but we need to get just one more thing. We'll see more about this tactic in a later session. But for now, let's note that if you don't know how to respond to this tactic, you invite the other negotiator to just keep nibbling you, asking for more and more and more without end. No but signals that you won't put up with nibbling, but that you will consider an exchange. Skilled negotiators further prepare for nonlinear bargaining by identifying their priorities in advance, by knowing which topics are most important to them and which topics are least important. So, for example, the skilled negotiator is ready to suggest a trade, better non-compete terms for his side in return for more favorable financing terms for the seller. That's because he knows which topic is more important to him and which is less. As we've seen, also, a skilled negotiator strives also to understand the other negotiator's priorities before and during the talks, so that he has the best chance to propose an attractive trade. To do that, as we've seen, the skilled negotiator does research beforehand, empathizes, listens, and asks questions before proposing a deal. One of the best ways to practice nonlinear bargaining effectively and to propose wise creative trades is to offer a package deal. That is, to be ready to suggest at the right moment a proposal on several topics. So, for example, acting as the buyer, a skilled negotiator might say, what if we gave you more of the money up front and we agreed to a longer non-compete clause? In fact, skilled negotiators go further and often plan to present a written proposal covering several topics. Now, I don't recommend that you do this the first moment that you meet someone. Hello, I have a 10-point term sheet to present to you. That's just way too aggressive. It's self-defeating, too. There's no rapport building, no listening, no learning, no respect, just an unsettling and impersonal offer. In many cases, the other negotiator will be quite put off, and probably rightly so. But at some point, a skilled negotiator may want to say something like this. Okay, now that we've gotten better acquainted, and I have a better understanding of your concerns, let's take a break so I can think it over and make some suggestions. What if we met tomorrow at this time? Then, at the next meeting, the skilled negotiator might say, I'm glad to see you again. I thought carefully about our conversation yesterday. As I promised, here's a proposal of several of the topics that we touched on. I'm flexible about the specific terms as long as it serves my firm's interests. Let me invite you to look it over and tell me what you think. For informal matters, you may want to simply jot down the proposal on the back of a napkin. For more important matters, you may want to present them as a letter, a memo, a draft contract, or a term sheet. Each of these items is extremely common in negotiations, and rightly so. We call them single negotiating texts. A single negotiating text is a single document where you put down all the terms of the proposed agreement. It has lots of advantages. First, it naturally fosters nonlinear bargaining, inviting each side to jump around and make trades between topics. If linear bargaining is like a railroad schedule, a single negotiating text is like a map of the region. It gives you the lay of the land. It clearly spells out what the topics are, and it allows the negotiators to manage the conversation more easily. Everything we're discussing is laid out before us in a fairly organized format. When you're dealing with many parties or many issues, a single negotiating text is actually virtually essential. Whether you're dealing with a multi-million-dollar aircraft deal, drafting major legislation, discussing a treaty, or buying a cell phone plan, a single negotiating text makes life and negotiation a lot easier. One particularly common business example of a single negotiating text is a term sheet. With a term sheet, you list each of the topics on one side of the page and a summary of the proposal for that topic on the other side of the page. It's a sketch, if you will, of the proposed deal. In my several years practicing corporate law, I saw that term sheets were just a bread and butter part of the task of business negotiation. Once we understand the idea of a package offer, we can build on it by introducing a more advanced idea called mesos. Promise, I'll tell you what it stands for in a moment. But let's get the basic concept first. With mesos, you propose a couple of package offers simultaneously, offers you'd be equally content with. Studies find that when you offer mesos, the other negotiator tends to trust you more and be more satisfied with the results. And you can see why. We all like to have a choice, and having a choice gives us a greater sense of control and a better chance of finding something that suits our needs. That's what shopping is all about. Even if the other negotiator rejects both offers, offering them can still help you. You can say, okay, I get that neither works for you. Which of the two offers is closer to meeting your needs? Whatever she tells you will shed light on her preferences and priorities and allow you to craft new offers that may work better. For example, imagine I'm trying to get my little daughter Hannah to brush her teeth. I offer her 2 toothbrushes, a blue one and a Dora the Explorer one. And frankly, I don't care which toothbrush she picks as long as she brushes her teeth. If she says, I don't like either of them, I can reply, okay, sweet pea, which one is less yucky? If she says the Dora brush is less yucky, now I know she may prefer brushes with cartoon characters, and so I may offer her a Winnie the Pooh brush or a Diego brush. Now, I promise you, I don't overindulge my daughter like this most of the time, but you get the idea. By giving her choices, I can home in on her preferences better and give her and me more satisfaction. Now you can see how they came up with the name mesos. It's an acronym that means multiple equivalent simultaneous offers. The basic idea is to give 2 separate deal proposals, but there are other ways to use mesos too. I find that you can also usefully build mesos into a term sheet by saying, on this issue, let me give you a choice. I'll agree to either this approach or that approach, whichever you prefer. I trust your judgment. That choice also seems to build trust and satisfaction. Now, so far, everything we've said in this session fosters creative negotiation. But how do you negotiate distributively at the same time if you need to? Here again, systematic preparation matters. Skilled distributive negotiation starts, as we've previously seen, by doing 2 key things. First, setting explicit best targets, and also by setting clear walkaway targets. That is, by setting a range. You want to do that for each of the topics. That way, you know what you're striving for on each issue and what you'll settle for, if you must, without giving away the store. And while you don't have to set an ambitious best target, let's assume here that you do have a mandate to be ambitious. So, for example, in our negotiations to buy a new business, you might decide that your best target for your top priority, non-competition, is 10 years, and your least acceptable target is 2 years. You might also decide that your best target for your second priority, financing, is to pay 50% cash now, the rest later, and that the least acceptable target is all cash up front. Your next step is to craft a package that is well cushioned, especially one that cushions your favorite topics. Doing that allows you to make concessions and still come out strongly on the issues that are most valuable to you. So, for example, you might prepare to make this offer. What if we offered you 12 years non-compete and payments of 50% cash now, 50% later? Here, you're cushioning your favorite topic, so you can make concessions and still wind up getting your best target of 10 years. You're ready to make faster and greater concessions on your lower priority topic, financing, which you have not cushioned. Now you have the chance to do well for yourself and still make trades. But wait, isn't this draft offer too aggressive? What happened to the creative side? Good question. Unless you do something more, You may wind up getting into a distributive struggle that hurts you both. So you want to signal in a couple of ways that you're flexible and genuinely want to find a way that works for both sides. One way to do that is to plan to preface the offer with language that clearly signals a desire to be creative. That's why we suggested language like this. Now that we've gotten better acquainted and I have a better understanding of your concerns, let me suggest a proposal. I'm flexible about the specific terms as long as they serve my firm's interests. Let me invite you to look at it and tell me what you think. But wait, is this just puffery? Isn't the actual proposal we've drafted very one-sided? Good question. To clearly signal that we're sincerely open to creative negotiating, we can temper our draft proposal before we propose it. One way is to soften it by planning to say something like this. We propose something like a 12-year non-compete and payments of 50% cash now, 50% later. Another way is to clearly signal your priorities and your flexibility by adding something like this. While each term is important to us, we might be more flexible on the payment terms. Now again, you don't have to be ambitious. You can choose to compromise, satisfice, or even sacrifice generally. The key is being ready and making your choices intentionally. To help manage all these tasks more efficiently and wisely, let me share with you now a simple but powerful tool I've created called the Topics, Targets, and Trade-offs Grid. The Topics, Targets, and Trade-offs Grid is a planning device that lets you get ready for creative and competitive negotiating. Because it's so short and simple, it has another advantage too. It's something you can refer to in the thick of the negotiation itself. American football coaches have something similar, a laminated play card that sums up the plays they've worked on for days before the game. In the heat of the game, they can't open up their laptops, but they can easily call a play by glancing at the card. The Topics, Targets, and Trade-offs Grid gives you something similar. It's a handy reference tool that lets you make offers and trades in real time with just a quick glance. To create a Topics, Targets, and Trade-offs Grid, take a piece of paper and write 4 column headings at the top. Topics, Targets, Trade-offs between topics, and trade-offs within topics. We'll develop it in a moment. But first, notice something about the grid we're creating. The Targets section will give you the key information you need to plan for the distributive side of the talks. The 2 trade-off sections will give you the key information you need to plan for the collaborative side of the talks. And the first column is the topics column. That is, the agenda, the issues we'll want or need to discuss during the negotiation. Let's create a list of topics for our company acquisition talks by listing under that heading 2 topics, payment terms and non-compete. Now, of course, for a real-life acquisition deal, we might have several dozen topics, but let's keep it simple for the sake of learning. So congratulations, you've just created a draft agenda for the upcoming talks. Why is an agenda so important? Several reasons. First, as we've seen, it's much easier to make trades between topics if you know what the topics are. Second, it's also much easier to prioritize your topics if you know what the topics are. Third, by thinking early about an agenda, you're equipping yourself to begin to shape your talks with the other side. You've probably seen on the news some diplomats say something like this: "The status of the capital of our beloved homeland is non-negotiable in the upcoming peace talks." There, the diplomat is trying to shape the agenda by refusing to make concessions on a particular issue, by taking it out of the conversation altogether. If she succeeds, she's won an important victory for her side before the talks even begin. You can also do this directly by suggesting an agenda to the other side. Do this more directly by suggesting an agenda to the other side. Doing that at an appropriate moment can help both sides gear up for the talks and so have a more constructive and efficient discussion. So, for example, you might email the other negotiator something like this: "I enjoyed our first conversation last week and look forward to our next meeting Friday. To make good use of the time, I thought it would be helpful to here list things we'll probably want to cover. Let me know what you think." The next part of the topics, targets, and trade-offs grid is the target section. And notice that it's a plural, targets. Here, you're going to note your ranges for each topic. That is, your best target and your walkaway. As we've seen, that helps you manage the distributive side effectively. And later, you can use it to help you cushion your first offer. The third part of the grid is the trade-offs between topics section. That is, your priorities. We've said that knowing your priorities lets you trade the cheap for the dear. Here, you would simply note that non-compete is your number one priority and payment terms number two. That lets you trade some of one for more of the other. The last column of the grid is the trade-offs within topics section. That is, your best creative options. Here, you can put your creative bargaining skills to best use by listing for each issue the most promising creative ways you've thought of satisfying the interests there. So, for example, what if you're at an impasse on the non-compete issue? Drawing from your earlier brainstorming list of, say, 6 different creative options, you cherry-pick the 2 or 3 best and put them here. One promising idea might be an exclusive consulting contract for the seller that pays her to stay loyal to you. Another might be an employment contract. Once you've completed the grid, you can play with it by using it to craft several package deals. As we've seen, you can craft an opening offer using the principles we've discussed. You can also go further and develop some creative proposals where you mix and trade different terms in creative and favorable ways. That's good to have handy. When you're not sure what to do during the talks, you can suggest one of these deals, or some variation of them. It's also very wise to use the grid to identify the worst acceptable offer. That can act as a bright line test, alerting you when the other's offer is just terrible. So there it is, the topics, targets, and trade-offs grid. I find that it can be very helpful getting me focused, creative, competitive, and ready for negotiations. If I could only bring one piece of paper to a negotiation, that's the sheet I'd bring. And I'm not alone. Students, colleagues, and I have done some informal experiments with such tools and found that they can dramatically improve performance in simulated negotiations. So I challenge you to try it out by taking 20 minutes to create one before your next serious negotiation. But now I want to go beyond the grid and look a bit further at the human dynamics of the challenge we're exploring. To negotiate wisely and warmly without damaging trustworthiness calls on us to do more than just plan well. It calls on us to take care to use the techniques we've discussed previously to show real respect and consideration. That ability to wisely convey a respectful tone and win warmly may be especially important to women. We've all heard about the pay gap that women face. Partly that gap is due to sexism. As Linda Babcock and Sarah Lashiver found in research leading to their book Women Don't Ask, it's also due to the fact that women rightly sense they pay a high social cost when they ask for more, one that men don't often have to pay. When a man asks for more, studies find his superiors find him as assertive, confident, and reasonable. When a woman uses the same language to ask for more salary, her superiors view her as pushy, aggressive, and worse. So it's not enough to simply tell women to overcome their hesitation and assertively ask for more, because doing so plays into that social cost. But it's possible for women to win warmly in their professional negotiations for themselves by applying our negotiation principles to the gender gap. Later research by Babcock and by Harvard's Hannah Riley Bowles suggests that reframing can help women in compensation talks and beyond. The study was led by Bowles and found that women are more likely to be successful if they explain why their request is appropriate, but in terms that also communicate that they care about maintaining good relationships at work. For example, instead of saying, "It's not fair I'm getting paid less," it might be more effective to say, "Alan suggested I check with you about salary. Since I know the company rightly prides itself on being fair, I thought it might be useful if we check some benchmarks and see what's reasonable these days. What do you think?" Again, that's not a script, it's just an example. By the way, don't let anyone tell you that women are worse negotiators than men. A remarkable study of women in legislatures around the world found that in truth, women are probably better by a number of key benchmarks. But when advocating for themselves, women often face a social penalty men don't face, which is why, while refraining is useful for everyone, it may be especially useful for women when they're advocating for themselves. That matters to me for several reasons, but none more than this. I'm a father raising 2 future women, and I want them and all my women students to get fair outcomes. Now that we've developed the ability to dance and box, to manage the tension between the creative and the distributive sides, we can go beyond these foundational aspects and recognize that there are hidden features to a negotiation that can profoundly shape the outcome. Some of these things hide in plain sight at the table, and some are in the air around it. Miss these hidden aspects, and you may be unhappily surprised by the results. See them, and you may have much better outcomes. Specifically, we're first talking about the timing and the setting for the negotiations, an increasingly complex question in the age of advanced communications. We're also talking about the influential players from away from the table and the political help and challenges they bring with them. It's to that rich and nuanced side of the work that we turn next.